If I had £1 for every time I saw a Mary Sue article, I wouldn't be a millionaire, but I'd definitely have quite a decent nest egg. But who or even what is a Mary Sue? Like, what's she done? Where did she come from? Where did she go? To answer that, we need to go back to the era of 1973. The original series of Star Trek ran from 1966 to 1969. It told the adventures of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise as they explore strange new worlds. 3 seasons and 79 episodes later, the show was cancelled. But with reruns in the early 70s, the fanbase exploded. But the internet back then wasn't really a thing, so what there were instead were these fan-made magazines, or fanzines for short. People often didn't do it for the money, they just did it for the love of it. However, the people that wrote for these, their passions often dwarfed their skills as writers. Pieces were often cliched and of poor quality, which is fine because they're supposed to be a celebration of the work, not a replacement for the work itself. And with fanfiction, that's something true to this day. Some of these cliches could be that they're the youngest lieutenant or yeoman in Starfleet and they're the best in what they do. Often the whole crew absolutely adores them, and they sometimes have a distinguishing feature that makes them somewhat different. Now, many in the fanzine community were a bit frustrated about this, and they thought that fanfiction often deserved better. Now, this led writer Paula Smith to write a parody piece. In 1973, her story A Trekkie's Tale was published in the Trekkie Menagerie 2. It's a short story that follows a Lieutenant Mary Sue. Let's give it a read, shall we? Gee, golly gosh, glorioski, thought Mary Sue as she stepped on the bridge of the Enterprise. Here I am, the youngest lieutenant in the fleet, only 15.5 years old. Captain Kirk came up to her. Oh, Lieutenant, I love you madly. Will you come to bed with me?
FBI, open up!
Captain, I'm not that kind of girl. You're right, and I respect you for it. Here, take over the ship for a minute, while I go get some coffee for us. Mr. Spock came to the bridge. What are you doing in the command seat, Lieutenant? The captain told me to. Flawlessly logical. I admire your mind. Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott beamed down with Lieutenant Mary Sue to Rigel... was that 37. To Rigel 37. They were attacked by green androids and thrown into prison. In a moment of weakness, Lieutenant Mary Sue revealed to Mr. Spock that she too was half Vulcan. Quickly recovering, she sprung the lock with her hairpin, and they all got away back to the ship. But back on board, Dr. McCoy and Lieutenant Mary Sue found out the men who had beamed down were seriously stricken by the jumping cold Robbies. Mary Sue less so. While the 4 officers languished in sickbay, Lieutenant Mary Sue ran the ship, and it ran so well she received the Nobel Peace Prize, the Vulcan Order of Gallantry, and the Tralfamadorian Order of Good Guyhood. Good Guyhood, wow. However, the disease finally got to her, and she fell fatally ill. In the sickbay, as she breathed her last, she was surrounded by Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott, all weeping unashamedly at the loss of her beautiful youth and youthful beauty, intelligence, capability, and all-round niceness. Even to this day, her birthday is a national holiday of the Enterprise. So yeah, that's where the whole thing about the Mary Sue comes from. But the purpose of it was to satirise fanfiction at the time, and the term Mary Sue stuck, and it eventually crossed fandoms, and it was often used as a pejorative and a means to signify bad writing. So by calling a character a Mary Sue, that's implying that the author hasn't done the work in order to justify the character being as skilled as they are. And these tropes aren't just exclusive to female characters, that there's often the Gary Sue, the Gary Stew, or the Marty Stew. And it got to the point where we started to have these Mary Sue litmus tests. We had one in 1997 by Merlin Missy, and another one in 2012 by Sierra McTayi, both made with the aim in order to help authors from falling into these traps of making their characters Mary Sues. And in the 2010s, the term arguably became a bit more mainstream, and with it being more mainstream, more characters started to come under the magnifier. 2 notable examples could be Rey from the recent Star Wars films and Michael Burnham from Star Trek Discovery. There's a few points that people use to justify Rey being a Mary Sue, like her ability to pilot the Millennium Falcon without any prior knowledge on piloting, being able to use the Force without any training, and being able to stand toe-to-toe with Kylo Ren. And the reasons people give for Burnham being a Mary Sue are her ability to outlogic a computer, her knowledge on various different things, and the fact that a lot of other characters seem to idolise her. But are they really? Let's have a look at the litmus test. Everyone, how many are there? Oh goodness me, I'm only halfway through. Okay, so total score was 30, and that will put it to very high chance. Okay, I've done Ray's and it's come out to 54, which is most certainly a Mary Sue. Alright, so I've got a high chance for Michael Burnham and a certainly for Ray. Now, it got me thinking that looking at the 100 plus questions, there are some oddly specific things like being the chosen one or being adopted by another species. Like, yeah, it's identifying things from a well-known trope. But in the case of Michael Burnham, that she was a human that's been orphaned, but she got adopted by a Vulcan and a human parent, which adds an interesting dynamic when it comes to her, that she's a human, but she has been raised by Vulcans or in a Vulcan society. It raises interesting questions about nature versus nurture. By putting her in between, it successfully analyses Vulcan and human society. Now that itself is an interesting concept, but should it really count against her? I mean, Ray, looking at the test, it's almost implying that for her to score low, she has to not be involved with the plot at all. Like, yeah, she does know how to use the Force, but that helps to move the plot along. Some say it's unbelievable, but look at Luke Skywalker in the first film. He made that 1 in a million shot. And there's another question about if they're part of a greater prophecy. I think Anakin Skywalker would be a good candidate for that. What about Spock? Like, he's the only half Vulcan member of the Enterprise. That could be his identifiable characteristic. He has vast knowledge on various different topics. All that time in the episode Patterns of Force, where he managed to use a crystal piece of metal and a light bulb to create a laser to get out of jail. If you ask me, that's probably a little bit more contrived than the hairpin, but again, I can see why the whole Mary Sue thing originated within the Star Trek fan base. All these specific questions about the character dying, everyone mourning their loss, and then them coming back to life to the glee of everyone else. Like, there is one character that really comes to mind. But then again, it's not the be-all and end-all test. That it's just there to help people to identify if their characters are overpowered. It's not supposed to be an indication of quality. But it's also important to note that the author of the test, Sierra McTighe, no longer supports the test as of early 2019. They've only left it online just for archival purposes and if anyone else wants to use it. And I use it for A. Michael just to see what they would get on that test. Saw a Tumblr post with a blogger saying how when she was 13, she was led to believe that any female character who possessed more than 2 skills was a Mary Sue. Drove her to change some of her original creations and developed a mindset where women's skills had to be explicitly justified in order to not be slapped with that dreaded label. Another Tumblr blog talks about how female characters are criticised disproportionately more, which I think is fair to say. That is Spock a Marty Sue? Arguably he is, but you don't hear that in internet discourse. And that's just it, like the criticisms of the Mary Sue characters are directed more towards female characters. Alright, with the name of Mary Sue, you're primed more towards looking at female characters. At the same time, these tropes were still apparent at the time that A Trekkie's Tale was written. And the online sphere wasn't really kind to Ray when Force Awakens was first released. I mean, that was about the time I was exposed to the term Mary Sue as well. And when you look at the litmus test on the Internet Archive, you can see a big spike in November 2015, a little before Force Awakens was released. There was no shortage of angry internet talky people talking about how badly this film has been written based solely on the trailer, all recycling the same talking points. Alright, yeah, I'm not saying that any film is immune to criticism, like you can criticise something for having weak writing, but there's a difference between genuine criticism and blindly hating on something. And the film came about around about the same time that we started to see more female characters who had depth and nuance, not just having female as a character type. Times were changing and some people just don't like change. It wasn't just Ray or Michael that were caught in the crosshairs of the angry internet talky people. Should really trademark that term. You had Jodie Whittaker's Doctor and Captain Marvel, female protagonists where there has often been male protagonists before. Is some of this rooted in misogyny? I'd say yes. Okay, yeah, there is genuine criticism to have of people like, say, Ray and Michael Burnham. That is the writing that strong? Are the characters that well defined? We can argue all day till the cows come home, but making critiques using the term Mary Sue, personally, it doesn't sit too well with me. Using the term Mary Sue, I think, has that stigma of being used by the angry internet talky people, which sort of invalidates some of the criticism. And to be honest, I think it sort of does a disservice to the discourse. To criticise the criticisms, I think the critiques would be a lot more effective if they didn't use the word. Along with her announcement, Sierra McTighe also placed a link to another test called Does My Character Work Okay? How to Tell for Yourself, and encourages visitors to use that site instead. So with these Mary Sue characters, that the worst thing you can accuse it of being is bad writing, but you can more effectively say that by calling it bad writing as opposed to calling it Mary Sue. And at the end of the day, to quote another Tumblr blog, why is this bad and who does this hurt? I first went into this video thinking, oh okay, this is a nice little novelty, let's see the origins and what makes these characters part of this book. And I didn't really know much about the consequences or the ramifications of this term, so for me it's been interesting just to have a look at and just seeing the depths of it as opposed to just looking at it from the surface level. And reading what people do a lot more writing than me have written, I would agree that the term Mary Sue probably should be retired. And to leave another quote, I hope that it will ward off other creative 8th graders before they get tricked into buying into the shame culture that forms around the creation of original characters. Thank you very much for watching. I'd like to know what you think about this. I know it can be a bit of a contentious issue. I know there's like a broad spectrum of thought on this, so I would like to know what other people think and why they think that. So please feel free to let me know in the comments below. I like to read what you say. If you like what you see, please subscribe and I'll see you later.